Welcome everyone to the EMPA Picker Center Food for Thought lecture series. We're honored to have with us today Georgia Haddad, who has served us in the past, and we'll be discussing strengthening the federal pipeline, the Cybersecurity Talent Initiative. As always, if you could keep your questions in the chat or to the end, we have Q&A, and keep yourself on mute to be respectful of our speaker. The sessions will be recorded and will be found on the website, which we'll include in the chat, but you could just look up Food for Thought lecture series and you should find it there. You can find past sessions and future sessions you can register for. So thank you, Georgia, for joining us, and to the team for making this happen, as always. And I'll hand it off to Bill.
Well, thank you, Jeremy, and thank you everyone for coming. We're really delighted to have Georgia with us today. She is part of our family. She served here at CIPO when she was getting her degree as my teaching assistant, which I was grateful for. And she did a great job. And she also worked at the Picker Center for a while when we were first starting the Food for Thought lecture series. And now, as we're well into our third year, it's appropriate that we have Georgia back as a speaker. We have, as those of you who have checked, we have a long list of speakers, very impressive group of people talking on a wide variety of topics that range from the practical to the theoretical to the spiritual. And the idea was to bring people who are interested in making the world a better place, to have an easy outlet to some of the best minds in the world and what they're thinking about and what they're working on, and how we might collectively come together, particularly during the somewhat troubled times that we live in these days, to make progress and make the world a better place, which indeed I can say, as one of the oldest people on the Food for Thought series, things are dramatically better than they were when I was a young person. So got to keep perspective. Things are getting better. They have a long way to go, but Georgia particularly is a person who's focused on how we can make the world a better place, and has been for a long time. She's worked here in the US and also in Lebanon, among other places, on education and training as a vehicle for empowering people to help each other and to help themselves as well. She's currently working in a program called the Partnership for Public Service. And it's a way to do, well, she'll tell us more about it, but what I like about it is it's a way of encouraging people to get engaged in public service, which has, at an early part of my life, John Kennedy, when elected president, in his speech said something that lasts to this day. And he said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And to me, that's really what public service is about, and one of the ways that you can help the world be a better place. So without further ado, let me turn the program over to Georgia, and in doing so, thank her for doing this for us. So Georgia, please proceed.
So thank you, everyone that's here, a few of you Picker Center folks. It's really fun to be back in a different capacity after working on this program. And Bill, as you mentioned, I worked as your TA, and you also really helped me double down on my love for public-private partnerships. So I think that plays a lot into my role here. So all of that said, today I'm going to talk a bit about the Partnership for Public Service, which, as was mentioned, is the nonprofit that I work for, and also tell you about the partnership's approach to enhancing government effectiveness. Then I'll get into the Cybersecurity Talent Initiative, which is a program that I manage at the partnership. And then, of course, if there's any questions, feel free to type them in the chat or just interrupt me, since I know it can be hard to see everything. It's hard to see everything for me. And then just one quick note is that I actually worked at the Partnership for Public Service before I went to graduate school at CIPA. And I was in a pretty different capacity than I'm in now, but I can definitely explain that as I go through. So kind of big picture, the Partnership for Public Service is in its 21st year of operation, and it's a nonpartisan nonprofit and is really viewed as a good government actor across the federal landscape. So the partnership is widely seen as neutral, which helps to give us convening power and has helped cement the organization's reputation. So quick background on the partnership. The partnership's early focus was around bringing on a new generation of federal employees and advocating for policies that make government better. And this is still very much behind most of what the partnership does, but I'll quickly mention the initial founder of the partnership for some context, which actually, Bill, you kind of teed me up for. So the inspiration of a new generation in government was really driven by the organization's founder, Samuel J. Heyman, and he was really inspired by that call to service, John F. Kennedy's call to serve. He himself joined the US Department of Justice and served as an assistant US attorney for the District of Connecticut. But he really began to see that the drive young people had to join government at one time was fading out, and realized that an entire generation was about to retire. So all of those people who've been inspired by Kennedy's call to serve in the 60s were approaching retirement age. And sadly, this crisis still exists in government. Another interesting fact about the founding was that we were actually initially supposed to launch on September 11th, 2001. And of course, that date in particular really underscores the importance of having an effective government to serve the American people. So quickly, just the vision and mission of the organization. We envision a dynamic and innovative federal government that effectively serves the American people. And the Partnership for Public Service works to revitalize our federal government by transforming the way government works and inspiring a new generation to serve. So I thought I'd show the the partnership structure generally, just to help kind of underscore the types of programs that the partnership focuses on to adhere to that mission that I just read. So the programs team is comprised of lines of business. So business development, research analysis and evaluation, leadership development. Leadership development is actually where I formerly worked on the partnership. So that's really working with career federal employees, folks who are already in kind of senior positions, as well as political appointees. And what I do now is more on the federal workforce pipeline side. So I kind of like to think of it burning two ends of the candle, right? I've worked previously on enhancing the leadership capacity of government, and now I'm working on bringing in folks on the other side. So both of those elements are in the program side of the partnership. We also have the Federal Executive Network that brings together different federal executives, and then of course the Center for Presidential Transition, which I can talk a bit more about on the next slide. Communications, of course, all things communications internally, but also working to publicize initiatives that are really focused on recognizing the great work of the federal government and getting that information out there. Development then works with individual donors, foundations, and corporate sponsors to support the work of the organization more generally. And then the Gov Affairs team fields questions from Capitol Hill staff. They've championed more than 30 pieces of legislation, and they lead our reform efforts and the Alliance for Congress initiative, which helps to educate members of Congress on recommendations highlighted in some of our research work. So that's kind of how the organization is structured as a whole. And then to take this a step deeper, when we think about how to improve government, which is of course a pretty ambitious goal, the partnership has boiled down these three items for its current strategic plan. The updated version hasn't been released yet for next year, but I know that Bill is really big on strategic plans, so I figured that I would make sure I mentioned this. So the first item is presidential transition. I'm not sure if anyone's heard of the Center for Presidential Transition. It was something that was launched when I was originally at the partnership and really got a lot of traction in the years while I was gone. And I kept hearing the name, the Center for Presidential Transition, during the last few elections, especially while I was in grad school. And I kind of noticed that it took on a life of its own, and people didn't necessarily understand that it was connected to the Partnership for Public Service. So that element really focuses on appointee prep and learning from previous transitions. So this includes helping to convene representatives from and share information across the outgoing and incoming administrations, and then helping to create position descriptions to assist in a faster appointment and selection process for political appointees to take on critical positions, which is something that, as some of you might know, has really been a struggle in recent administrations. Then for performance insights, we're helping government understand how to better use data to drive decision-making. So we have a particular focus on improving the customer experience, but also, of course, the experience of government employees themselves in government. The partnership publishes the best places to work in the federal government rankings, which agencies really lean on to help indicate their progress and inspire a bit of healthy competition across agencies. This is something else that I think people know by name, but don't necessarily understand that it's attached to the partnership. Then agency transformation. So we do a lot through our open enrollment programs, and some of the programs held by my organization are open to government employees from across different agencies. But this priority really drills down on the recognition that you can make a different kind of impact when working with agencies as a whole. So the partnership has seen significant organizational shifts within the Department of Labor and the Department of Education based on this kind of direct programming. And this is definitely an area that the partnership feels that it should really keep digging into. The program that I manage really falls into the last bucket, focusing more on bringing talent into government. And overall, I would just say that the organization really focuses on critical connections. So we work with a variety of entities in the public and private sectors and across government. And I'll just add that the drive here is not for a bigger or smaller government, but essentially we recognize that smart, effective government matters, and we build connections towards that end. I'll slip in one more angle that the partnership has really focused on since the forming of the strategic plan, which is trust in government. As you might guess, this is a major public issue that the partnership has identified and done significant research on. I'll give you a minute to look through some of these statistics on trust in government. Overall, the partnership hopes to support long-term, or support, changing these trends long-term through both actually increasing the effectiveness of government by supporting leadership, hiring efforts, and sharing research findings with Congress, but also really helping to amplify success stories that better showcase the average person, how the average person is impacted by government work outside of the political realm, because sometimes it's hard to make that connection. But some of these are pretty bleak statistics. Okay, so finally, I will dig into the program that I spend most of my time on, which is the Cybersecurity Talent Initiative, which really focuses on supporting the talent pipeline in government, particularly in the cyber field. And I see a hand up, so they'll go ahead.
So just on the last slide, my question is, do you have any sense of the historical trends on these things? Does this represent a significant decline in the way Americans see the government? Is it, way worse? Is it consistent? Do you have any sense of what the trend lines are here?
Yeah, it's definitely dropping. And there's a whole team at the partnership that focuses on this, so I can definitely send you some of their work and the findings that they've had, because they've measured over time. But something kind of interesting that we're also seeing is that actual in the last year, probably for some pretty obvious reasons, some government employee happiness has changed as well. So that perspective is kind of seeping into how government employees view themselves. And I think that the vaccine mandate, as well as requirements to come back to work, has probably played into that, but we're definitely at a pretty critical moment for perception of government across the board.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. There's so much. I'm talking, of course, about a lot of different veins of work, and mine is just one corner of that, but there's a lot of interesting information to dive into, and it can certainly feel overwhelming. I think when I kind of lay this all out, I'm sure the response is like, oh, how do you do all of that as a small nonprofit? And we do little bits, right? But the trends and the information are pretty staggering and pretty big issues. Any other questions before I move on to the specific program that I work on, the Cybersecurity Talent Initiative? Okay. So overall, the program's objectives are really threefold. So one is to, in the small way that we're able to, drill down at the cybersecurity deficit that exists across all sectors, which you can see at that top number there. The second is to help make cross-sector connections that provide a pathway for skill sharing. So as you can see, the number of cyber risks really continue to mount, and threats are truly changing minute to minute. So the problem is only getting more extreme. And finally, the student debt crisis, which certainly strikes a chord with me. The amount of student debt that most people who attended university have in this country is only growing. To add to this, only 4% of the federal IT workforce is under 30, while 52% is over 50. Of course, there's immense value to having experienced technologists on staff, but the clear unbalanced age concentration makes it difficult to stay on top of ever-changing technology trends, especially as students emerge with the latest skills and knowledge of platforms every year. So I think this was a pretty surprising statistic to me when you think about how fast-paced technology changes really are. So getting into the players involved, this is a quick snapshot of the lay of the land. So the corporate partners participating agencies, Ben and CyberFista, who provides free technical training to the CTI participants during their time in government. Our corporate partners are MasterCard, Microsoft, and Workday. Accenture is also on board for future cohorts. Of course, the Partnership for Public Service is the program's operating partner. And then here are some of the participating agencies listed here. There are lots of subcomponents to each of these. For example, Army within DoD, Homeland Security, there's the Secret Service, there's Coast Guard, just a lot of different subcomponents within each of these agencies, but we have participants spread out across all of these. And then the structure of the program is essentially 2 years serving in a government cyber role, followed by the opportunity to apply to a role after those 2 years with one of our private sector partners. And if a candidate is ultimately hired by one of the private sector partners, then the candidate is eligible to receive up to $75,000 in student loan repayment. I'll also add that while participants are in their government roles, the partnership provides leadership development sessions to the participants, which is really kind of our bread and butter, as well as assigned industry mentors. So these first 2 years as cybersecurity professionals really pack a punch. And now we're just at the phase where participants from our first pilot cohort are able to transition sectors. So we're getting to see how this is really playing out. And agencies actually have definitely come up to bat for some of these candidates that they really want to keep and have done their best to provide competing packages to entice participants to stay, which is actually something that's kind of fun to see. Ultimately, whichever path participants take after federal service, graduates of the CTI program will emerge with cross-sector cyber experience as well as vast professional networks, providing flexibility and transparency into the professional cyber realm. So a lot on one slide. Any questions about the format of the program before I move on?
Just a quick question comment. There's some news today that the White House is going to direct the federal agency in charge of student loans to reform how it calculates interest, which would dramatically decrease the ongoing cost of student loans. Do you think this might, if it happens, that it'll increase corporate participation if the hook or the price of helping prospective new employees with their students' loans will actually drop?
It's certainly a good question. I think that is a piece that is both exciting for corporate partners to be engaged in a program that kind of has the halo effect of something like this, but that cost of that student loan piece is definitely an additional ask. So having it be, their money stretched farther certainly could be a recruitment tactic. Jeremy.
So I'd love to play devil's advocate in the situation. So in terms of the format, you're recruiting cybersecurity graduates. They have 2 years in a federal agency, and they can transition into the private sector, right?
Yeah.
So I guess it's two points. One is the initial problem of having a low amount of cybersecurity talent in that age range. I mean, it'd be like brain drain into private sector. So I guess that first question is, do you see a lot of people take that opportunity instead of staying in the federal sector? And the second question is, I think more general about optics, like revolving door between private sector and public sector, and it's a public-private partnership. But have you had pushback, and how do you respond to, the idea that one, seems like people would take the opportunity to go into the private sector, and two, how do you combat those questions of like the revolving door between public and private?
Yeah. So for one, we haven't fully seen how this is going to play out, right? Because the first cohort is just at the time where they could transition to the private sector now. And we've definitely seen an increased interest in staying in government, which is been from the partnership's mission perspective, right? Like an interesting thing to see. And we don't know exactly how it's going to play out, but particularly in the defense agencies, right? Some agencies have more of a capacity to provide kind of a competitive package that also includes more upfront student loan repayment, higher salaries for technologists, things like that. And those are policies that are kind of unfolding in real time to try to get that kind of talent in the door. So, some of these people, and I'll talk about this a bit more, but some of these people may not have ever looked at government at all. So, that's really the upshot here, right? Is access to candidates who may have foregone government service at all. And then in terms of the revolving door, I mean, to some extent, right, the way that government functions is through not only internal federal employees, but also contracting, consultants from outside of government. And those kind of connections are really how government functions in reality. So there are certainly limitations that some agencies might have, sort of being in the private sector on programs that are too closely aligned. And of course, we want people to abide by those rules. But the sharing of skill sets and knowledge across sectors is just going to have to be a part of facing the really big challenges that we face now. And in some senses, government doesn't have the capacity to face on its own, and the private sector doesn't have the capacity to face on its own. So, for us, we really want to lean into that piece where people feel like they really understand the value of government work and have actually been in government and know firsthand how critical the mission of some of the agencies that they've worked for are, but also they can kind of bring those skills and tactics across sectors in a really helpful way.
It'd be very interesting to see how this turns out. But
absolutely, absolutely. Okay.
Hey, Georgia, as long as we're on the subject, just a quick question here. Columbia has been trying to, or CEPA in particular, has been trying to strengthen its course offerings and research to focus on cybersecurity. We actually have had a couple of programs for the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Singapore through our exec ed. There are a couple of adjunct faculty members who are pretty well known in this area. Did you study this area while you were here? What do you see as both the costs and the advantages and disadvantages of CEPA's program? And are you seeing more MPA type programs with a focus on cybersecurity developing, either in conjunction with your program or more generally?
Yeah, so I actually didn't have a cyber focus at all in school. I had a security focus as well as a management focus. So, kind of the security piece is what I bring to this program. But there is a difference, I think, in cyber policy expertise and technical cyber expertise. And this program definitely looks for candidates who have that technical skill set. The policy piece is really helpful in conjunction, but most of the people that end up doing really well in this program have the technical skill set. And frankly, I haven't been through the recruitment phase of the program yet. We're getting into that now for this first year that I've been here through the full cycle. And I don't really know CIPA's cyber coursework as well as I probably will in a few months. We're having meetings with CIPA in the coming weeks. So I don't know if you have any more insight on if you're trying to shift the focus to be more technical or more sort of policy focused.
I think it's both, but I hear what you're saying. So really, many of the people who would go through this program would have a background in computer sciences or in engineering rather than public policy.
Exactly. And for the people that had an undergraduate degree that was more technically focused, and then a graduate degree that's policy focused, you might be really well suited actually for this role.
Okay, great. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll jump back in, but feel free to interrupt if any other questions come up. So like I said, for many of these participants, and as we kind of talked about, government work may have not been a top priority or something that they even knew much about. And private sector companies have a ton of leverage when hiring and recruiting that government often doesn't have. But government can be rewarding in a way that's really been showcased through this program. So as I said, one thing that we've been able to see across the board is that actually all of the candidates from our first cohort have really enjoyed federal work and have indicated that they plan to return to government at some point in their careers. And for some of them, it wasn't even sort of in the pipeline in the first place, which is pretty awesome from our perspective. And then again, as I mentioned, there's just a lot of barriers to entry to government work for some folks. Private sector hires much faster, salaries are often more significant in a big way. And of course, along with this, a lot of people are possibly harboring student debt, which really hurts potential interest in government roles. Not to mention that I think it's just plain hard to understand the ways that cyber skills can really be utilized in government. So there's just so many interesting options and certainly things that I've learned that I would have never known about. So this program really helps recruit a diverse group of candidates, significantly more diverse than the national average across the board, and in a way that I think eliminate some of the barriers to entry for government work. So for instance, the national average for female cyber talents around 18%. CTI for this cohort round that's coming in is about 40. Same for Black and African American cyber talent, which is nationally around 13%. And for the incoming cohort 3 is around 55%. And then of course, on the private sector side, when thinking about what the experience of the actual participant is, there's a wealth of knowledge available on this side as well. And though the opportunity to test out both sectors in a controlled environment in the first few years of a new career can really be immensely beneficial. So participants have lots of opportunities to hear from speakers from across government during their time in the leadership development program, as well as private sector speakers during their first 2 years. And then they also participate in networking events that really increase their cyber field connection. So regardless of where they land, they'll have that opportunity. Yeah. Jeremy.
Sorry to interrupt, but question about the model, and I think it's great that you noted the diversity of the participants and a really great benefit, which is getting to test both in a controlled environment. And I was wondering just if there's any other models this is built off of or emulate that where these kinds of participants, not necessarily cybersecurity, but where this is the case where out of undergraduate or advanced degrees, candidates who go in and have a controlled environment where they could test out both sectors. Because I think in terms of policy for federal government, I know there's a big need for cybersecurity, but I think it would be useful for other sectors as well, and even something that's like instituted across federal agencies. So I was wondering if that exists in other parts of federal government.
Yeah, so in terms of technical programs, there are programs that are similar in that they help to bring in cyber talent to government, but the cross-sector piece is actually pretty unique to the CTI program. The US Digital Corps is the example that I think is most often compared to this program. And It's not cyber specific, it's kind of for general technologists, and it really focuses on bringing people in for a 2-year fellowship in government. The finance structure is a little bit different, so they just sort of have different parameters than this program. But yeah, the cross-sector piece is pretty unique for a technology-focused program. There are now some, the cool thing about CTI, I think, is that it was ahead of its time in some ways. And now agencies are starting to create their own internal programs to try to kind of lure in cybersecurity talent that otherwise may have not looked for government roles. So it's nice that there are other programs, right? Like at a nonprofit, your mission is kind of always to put yourself out of work by having the problem go away, right? Okay, so I'll quickly just add a few points on what's in it for the agencies to participate, in case that's not totally clear. So government agencies basically get to have access to pre-vetted candidates for free and provide insight, or know that these candidates really get insight into some of the agencies that are lesser known, perhaps less sexy than some of the big agencies that candidates typically know about. And then again, we're finding that participants are really enjoying their government work and have indicated already that they'd like to either stay in government or perhaps cycle back in their careers, Jeremy, to your point. So here are some snapshots from the CTI site, which of course I can share in the link, and you can feel free to check it out if you'd like. You can take a look at current participants in cohort 1 and cohort 2 and share it with someone if you think they might be interested in applying. Of course, feel free to share my email. I'm happy to talk to anybody that's interested. And that is really it for my presentation today. Happy to answer any additional questions that folks might have. Thanks for jumping in with some questions along the way. I'll stop sharing for the time being. I know that we got a few questions in already.
So, Georgia, let me start off. So where do you see this leading for you? Obviously you didn't start this job that long ago, although this is like part 2. But do you see your career as an educator? Do you see your career as a policy wonk? I mean, where do you see yourself going 5-10 years from now? And how does this role fit into that?
Well, I'm keeping in mind that this is being recorded. I really like the kind of intermediary role that the partnership plays. And I think that there is a lot that can be gained from working across sectors. So I've really enjoyed being in that space. And I think I'd like to remain in a role that connects all of these different players, whether it be, on the government side. I've always been really interested in government work, or remaining in the nonprofit or private sector side. I really believe that government does so much. And I think working at the partnership early, honestly, really ingrained this understanding of how important government work is in all of these ways that, for somebody that's always been interested in policy and interested in government, didn't really understand. And, it's really been hammered into me that we have an impending crisis of young people not choosing government work. And I think there's a lot of good reasons for that. People are really frustrated. People, salaries are not catching up with what people require to, thrive. And it's a really worthy task to me. So I've really found myself digging into this area, and I think I'd be interested in looking at it from a different angle in the future, but kind of focusing on the same problem.
So just to follow up on that and how things are changing, we've, in recent years, we've been dominated at the federal level with elected officials who make me look young. So a lot of really older leaders, again, if we harken back to John Kennedy, he was the youngest president of the modern era. And that brought I think that helped bring public service to the fore. He had charisma and all those other things, but he was also young, and that inspired young people. Well, maybe I could do this too. So a changing of the guard of at some point, these people are going to retire or die. There will be a new generation of people in the Congress, a new generation of people in the White House, a new generation of people heading agencies. So I think that might spur it. But my real question is, you're working relatively closely. During the pandemic, the federal government really ratcheted up remote work and hybrid work. Now that we're on the tail end, hopefully, of the pandemic moving into endemic, is that now more part of the landscape of government jobs at the federal level? Or is the opportunity to work from home, to go in less days a week, is that becoming more typical to your knowledge?
Yes. I think, well, I know that telework was always an element of many agency structures. It was certainly something that we talked about when I was previously at the partnership, and something that we advocated for even then. There's certain agencies where, to some extent, that's just not going to be possible in terms of security, especially in this field, right? Like keeping all of your things in a safe place. But it's certainly more of a trend. The thing that has actually been surprising to me is that it's something that's not at all guaranteed on the private sector side, right? I think that there's been a lot of hesitation across the board to keep the openness to remote work as broad as it was before. So it's definitely something that these candidates are paying attention to, something that they value. And a lot of them have been able to work out some kind of a remote work deal with their employers on the public sector side, on the government side, but it's something that's not a guarantee on the private sector side either. So definitely a lot of interesting lessons learned by watching what, particularly people who spend most of their time online and focusing on cyber work, they don't really want to be in person largely, right. And that's been a barrier. I'm curious, Bill, just about the cyber program at CIPA, and sort of what you said that there's been a revamp a bit of the coursework in that vein. What's the new goal for this?
Well, so one of the things that's happening at CIPA now is that they have authorization now, official authorization for STEM 3-year OPT, which means, in taking it out of jargon, non-US students who come to CIPA, if they take concentrations that have science, technology, engineering, and math, qualify for an extra 1 or 2 years. Instead of 1 year or 2 years, they can get 3 years of an opportunity to work in the United States. So CIPA is offering more courses that are more technical. Now, the motivation for our international students, which are, when you were here, is about half. Now it's a little bit even higher than half. There's more of an incentive for international students to study these topics. But I think the spillover is that a lot of US students are seeing the opportunity to get, what I hear from students more often than not, and particularly prospective students, is the idea that they want to get tools, that they want to have tools that they can use to get work, to do work, hard skills. Some of those are management skills, some of them are technical, computer, engineering related, math related.
Yeah. So
I see that trend here at CIPA, motivated by several different factors. And I think it will continue. But I was interested in your response to my question. I think this is going to run head on into the dating game between employers and employees, in that I think many employers particularly after the pandemic, want workers to come back to work. I think there's a feeling among a lot of senior officials that people don't work as hard when they're not in the office, that they don't develop the kind of team and camaraderie that most work requires. So it's not just like overseeing and making sure people are working the whole time. It's that most problems are solved not by one person, but by teams of people with different perspectives. And a lot of the argument for diversity and all that is that diverse teams produce better results. But it's a lot harder to have a team when you've never even met the person except on Zoom. So I see that as, you know, particularly someone who's working in these cross partnership spaces. Again, if it's a public-private partnership, you're working with people who don't even work for the same organization. How are you going to build this kind of camaraderie and team and creative solutions when no one's ever in the same place at the same time? So I think that's a big challenge, not just for your program, but for work in general and for society in general as we move forward. You know, again, counterbalancing the idea that a lot of people see that I can do a lot of my work like I'm sitting in the office, but I could just as soon be sitting back at my farm doing exactly the same thing. And so I like to come to work and I like to be at work, but not 7 days a week either. So how do we balance these things? How do people who are trying to structure employment opportunities like you, how do they act as a facilitator to get employees and employers to see the benefits of both, and then how to move that way? I talk all the time about my experience working at the fire department, which is open 24 hours a day. It's never closed. There are always people in every facility all around the city, in person, every day, all the time, forever. But yet, you know, a significant portion of the workforce is not there. They work on different days, they work on different times, they work on different shifts, yet we use the same procedures, people know how to work together. So it can be done, it has been done in emergency service, in the Army, the Navy, you know, many public safety organizations are always open, and yet they found a way to build camaraderie in teams and all that. I think there's a good area of opportunity here for learning and growing as we go forward.
Yep, absolutely. I mean, just personally, I'm kind of trying to figure out what my preference is too, right? Like it's been a very interesting few years for all of us to experience both options and figure out what's really helpful. And I think for me, I'm very extroverted. I really like being around people. I think it's great for me to be around people. It feels really good. My office is in DC, and sometimes I get to go, and when I do, it really energizes me. And otherwise, I'm in New York. And I know for other people, they feel like they can actually be much more effective, right? Being alone and not having the stimulation of all of those other people. Maybe that's not the right instinct. Maybe they could really benefit from that, but it's certainly a really interesting thing to not just think about, you know, in terms of yourself, but how everyone's going to adapt to this. And it's been interesting too to kind of hear feedback from people who are at different phases in their careers. Because I think the need is different, but also younger staff, newer staff really benefits from being around staff that have been around longer. And it's such an interesting dynamic, which I know that you think about this all the time, but an interesting point. Jeremy.
Well, Don has a question, so I'll let Don go first in the chat.
Yeah, Don, great question. I saw this. I think that the programs that would be, you know, best aligned for general policy folks would be the PMS program and the White House fellowship programs. There's definitely some great public sector internships and fellowships that are more policy focused and don't have a specific technology angle. Let me know if, yeah, great.
And then my question was talking about, I think one part that I really love to hear about is the recruitment of those diverse candidates? Like, do you have partnerships with undergraduate or graduate institutions, and how do you lay that groundwork to bring in those students? Or is this something that students come to you for, or graduates come to you for, and they find through their networks?
Yeah, great question. So my colleague Logan Cole really focuses on our recruitment, and he has relationships with university as well as professional associations, and has also really found that professors reaching out to students directly is really effective. So having professors in cyber courses have a relationship with us and then let their students know that this is something that they've heard about has been very effective. We definitely focus on HBCUs and Hispanic serving universities and really want to grow those relationships. And in some of those cases, particularly like with Hispanic serving institutions in particular, you're not always able to interface with students from that background, even if that institution has that label, right? So that's definitely something that we are trying to double down on by speaking with affinity groups at universities and specific professional groups within organizations to continue to really broaden access to the program. Because the reality is that there's a lot of really outstanding students coming out of cyber related degrees across the country, and we want to make sure that we're speaking to the right people and expand access every year.
Wonderful, thank you.
And if you have any suggestions of student groups to reach out to at Columbia or otherwise, I'm all ears. We also have some government partners. We have an executive board that we communicate with twice a year for senior executive leaders on government and our private sector partners to kind of help us think big picture. And some of them are affiliated with or organizations that they kind of help plug us into as well.
Great. Thank you.
Well, I have one last question. Maybe you can give since you are working remotely, I assume most of the time, have you ordered but you were more of a regular employee before you came to SEPA. How have you restructured the way you work with a more remote primary job responsibility? Do you still get up at the same time every day? Do you go to a special place in your living quarters? I mean, how has it changed your work schedule?
Good question. For me, knowing that I already had in-person relationships with many of the people at the organization that I'm now at when I was going to start a remote role again was a pretty big point of attraction. That felt really important, and I thought it would sort of help the remote work piece be a bit more fluid. So that's been helpful. I don't know exactly what it would have been like if I didn't have those connections, but it's definitely been beneficial to me. I just feel much more plugged in culturally, and I think it would have taken a lot longer to get there if I had just started remotely. I live in an apartment in Brooklyn, so my special places are limited, right? But I definitely have a work setup that is got everything that I need. I really wanted to make sure that I felt like I had a desk that wasn't doubling as something else, which I've been lucky enough to have been able to do in a corner. My kitchen's behind me, my living room's to my left. And maybe this is sort of silly, but I know it's a challenge for a lot of people, getting outside every day and kind of bookending my days with either some kind of exercise or getting out in the morning, and then the same in the evening has been important for me to just feel like everything is not one day, one space. My home has two different functions, work's one and personal life is the other. Kind of having ways of separating the work day from the rest of life has been important for me and has sort of helped me. But work, I really like being in the office. I really enjoy being in DC. I think a really great part of remote work is being able to be in other places when you work and maybe spend your evenings in a different kind of way, which I've definitely been really happy to do and get more time with family. But I know a lot of people that are so happy to be fully remote and they don't want to go in at all. And I realize that I'm a very particular kind of person and that might not be the case for everybody, but I think that a hybrid is certainly what I gravitate towards. And working remotely most of the time, you're right, that's what I do. I've tried to bake in those kind of bookends to help normalize the work from home experience.
So we're just about out of time. You want to leave us with some parting thoughts about what you're doing now and what advice you would give to people entering into this new work world?
Sure, I can try. Well, thank you again for having me. It's really nice to see all these familiar faces and some of the faces that I don't know. I really loved my time at CIPA and I want to come back and visit more. So maybe I'll just come pop in on you one of these days. But in terms of the CTI initiative, I realize that it's not necessarily in the interest realm of some of the folks in your program, Bill, but government work more generally, I don't think I have to sell anybody at CIPA the importance of government work, but what I've seen just kind of in my own life and different ways that I've looked at government work in the past, and certainly working on the CTI program, is that government recruitment has some issues. It's hard, it takes a long time, there's a lot of barriers, and there's a lot of programs that have figured out ways to help people get in the door and really launch much more quickly than they'd be able to by going through some of the traditional channels. Now, if you're able to go through the traditional channels, that's awesome. But really considering a fellowship or another way to start out in government, maybe even have rotation, get to check out a few different things before you land on a more long-term position, can really be a great entry point and help you succeed without getting frustrated and feeling like, you know, I'm kind of done with this, I'm going to go to the private sector, without even really trying or actually having the chance to try out a role in government. So that would be my sort of parting ask, is if you are, you know, really focused on government work and you're frustrated, look at some different ways to get in government. There's a lot of different hiring authorities that people can use and don't know about. And there are people who are much better at thinking through those options than me, but they exist. So check them out.
Well, thank you very much. I'll flip it to Jeremy to close us out. And thanks again, Georgia. You were great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Georgia. And thank you everyone who joined us, and we'll see you soon.